Daniel, family, and friends, I've been unhappy for years. I want a divorce. His words hit like a bomb in the middle of our 25th anniversary party, and the sound of his champagne glass clinking was still audible. Both Thomas and Jennifer, our grown children, gaped at us. Friends' eyes darted between us as they halted in mid-sip. I had arranged the restaurant's private dining room with silver anniversary decorations and pictures from our decades-long relationship, but all of a sudden, it felt empty. I just nodded and said, "I understand completely." Daniel's expression briefly changed from one of amazement to one of disappointment at my poise. He had anticipated public humiliation, tears, or pleading. Rather, I turned to each astonished visitor and expressed my sincere gratitude for attending what had turned out to be our last celebration together. Marlene Griffin is my name. At the age of 57, I found myself standing in a classy restaurant watching my husband attempt to surprise me with our divorce after 25 years of marriage, raising our kids, running our Richmond, Virginia home, and helping Daniel through 3 job changes, 2 financial catastrophes, and 1 serious health scare. Guests threw daggers at Daniel and whispered their sympathy as the group clumsily dispersed. With the composure of someone who had made peace with a cyclone long before it reached land, I walked up to him. I put a single business card in his palm and added, "You'll want to call them first thing in the morning." When he saw the name on the embossed card, his eyes widened. Rebecca Stone, Esquire, one of Virginia's most dreaded divorce lawyers. His voice became uncertain as he asked, "Why would you have this?" I just gave him a quick grin and a pat on the arm before leaving to give our confused kids hugs. I looked over their shoulders as Daniel's self-assured face broke down at the slightest hint that something was amiss. He didn't know, I'd made sure he didn't know, that 6 months prior I had found a lease agreement for an apartment in Shockoe Bottom, our city's hip downtown area, in his desk drawer while searching for our property tax statement. When his phone lit up at dinner 2 days later, I caught a peek of a string of unsettlingly personal texts between him and a person who was simply referred to as a coworker. And that was only the start of my knowledge. I had painstakingly documented every facet of Daniel's infidelity for 6 months by the time he dropped the divorce bombshell at our anniversary party. Although I had been meticulously planning my exit strategy since Valentine's Day, he believed he was leaving our marriage on his terms. My grandmother used to tell me as a child, "Trust but verify." I had mostly disregarded this advice during my marriage. I had total faith in Daniel. We both worked for Ford when we first met, me at age 30 and him at age 32. Daniel was a rising star in sales. I was in human resources, and I was in security. After a fast-paced courtship, we were married. Within a year, with a prenuptial agreement that safeguarded us both in case things didn't work out. After having 2 lovely kids, I eventually left my job to take care of our expanding family. As Daniel's sales career took off, he climbed the corporate ladder by moving from Falwyn to Brightville Mining and then to Everkin Motors. Even when our kids grew up and needed their father at dancing recitals and soccer matches, which he unavoidably missed, I was there for every choice, every late night, and every weekend business trip. I would tell them, "Your dad is working hard for all of us," because I genuinely believed it. Our colonial home in the West End neighborhood, private schools for the children, and cozy family vacations twice a year are all examples of how effectively he provided. My friends would tell me that marriage changes after 20 years, and that it's normal to become more like roommates. But when I look back, I can see the signs I missed. The gradual emotional distance, the growing criticism of my appearance in comparison to the dynamic professionals he worked with, and the diminishing physical intimacy explained away by stress and aging. What wasn't normal, however, were the increasing number of business dinners that left his collar smelling of perfume I didn't wear, or the second cell phone I found in his briefcase while packing it for a hospital stay following his gallbladder surgery 3 years ago. He claimed that the phone was only for international clients, but it mysteriously vanished after his recovery. When I mentioned our dinner reservation, Daniel claimed a last-minute client emergency, which was not unusual. But I spent the evening alone, looking through old photo albums, wondering how we had drifted so far away from the couple in those faded pictures. I told myself these were misunderstandings. The alternative was too painful to contemplate. When I needed our property records the following morning to file our tax paperwork early, I discovered, nestled between car titles and home insurance documents, a lease agreement for an apartment on East Carey Street that had been signed 2 months prior, with Daniel's signature clearly visible on a 1-bedroom unit that cost almost a third of his monthly take-home pay. That discovery would completely alter my perspective on our 25th year of marriage. For 3 hours that day, I sat in my car, outside the apartment building, unable to decide whether to confront him right away or to act as if I had never seen the lease. The sophisticated brick building, with its rooftop deck and floor-to-ceiling windows, mocked everything I believed I knew about our financial situation. "We need to be more careful with spending this year," Daniel had told me just weeks before I discovered the lease. "The market's unstable." Nevertheless, he managed to find money for a $2,800 monthly rent in the city's most desirable neighborhood, money that was allegedly too tight for the kitchen renovation I had been requesting for 5 years. When I eventually drove home, I made 2 decisions that would change the course of my life. First, I would not confront Daniel until I fully understood what I was dealing with. And second, I would defend myself by obtaining as much evidence as possible before taking any action. Daniel and his co-worker Jessica Palmer had been involved for at least 18 months, and his texts were explicit, full of references to our place and plans for a future together once he handled things at home. I tested his phone the following morning, while he was at the gym. Daniel thought he was clever by using a fingerprint lock, but I had long noticed he used his right thumb to unlock it while he slept, so I carefully pressed his thumb to the sensor, checking messages that confirmed my worst fears. My hands trembled as I took pictures of important conversations with phone, making sure to record timestamps and contact details. The physical pain of betrayal was overwhelming, a vice grip around my chest that made breathing difficult. I read their exchanges and discovered that Jessica was 34, recently divorced herself, and worked in marketing at Everkin Motors. She had reportedly persuaded Daniel that their May-December relationship was his ticket to renewed youth and excitement. 25 years of memories were distorted by the realization that our recent history had been founded on lies. I almost felt like screaming, demanding answers and hurling his deceit in his face. But instead I smiled and brought him his favorite evening bourbon as Daniel kissed my cheek absently before diving into work emails that evening. "Working late again?" I asked nonchalantly, and he said without looking up, "Quarterly reports are coming up. Don't wait up." I nodded and went to our bedroom, where I let myself cry silently for 5 minutes before contacting my oldest friend, Valerie. When she replied, I added, "I need the name of the best divorce attorney in Richmond, and I need absolute discretion." "We won't just build a case, Marlene. We'll build an ironclad fortress," said Rebecca Stone, a distinguished lawyer with a silver-streaked bob and piercing eyes in her downtown office, 2 days after I had sat across from her and laid out what little evidence I had so far. But first, we must be fully aware of the challenges we face. Rebecca's advice was clear. Become an intelligence operative in marriage. Document everything, follow the money, and build a complete picture of our marital assets and Daniel's activities before giving him any indication I knew about his betrayal. The element of surprise is your greatest advantage, she counseled. The moment he knows you're aware, he'll start hiding assets and constructing his own narrative. So began my double life. On the surface, I remained the supportive wife of 25 years, managing our home, attending company functions on Daniel's arm, and planning our upcoming anniversary celebration. Beneath that facade, I transformed into a methodical investigator, documenting every aspect of our financial and personal lives. I started with our finances. Daniel had always handled the investments while I managed the household accounts. Now, I needed to understand the full scope of our portfolio. I told him I wanted to learn more about investing for knowledge, a request he dismissed with patronizing amusement, but ultimately granted by sharing our financial advisor's contact information. Just don't make any changes without consulting me first, he cautioned. These things are complicated. Our financial advisor, Harold Wilson, was initially reluctant to discuss details with me until I gently reminded him that as Daniel's spouse, I had a legal right to information about our joint assets. Once convinced, Harold became surprisingly forthcoming, particularly after I mentioned concerns about unusual money movements. Well, there have been some significant withdrawals over the past year and a half, Harold admitted. I assumed Daniel discussed these with you. He hadn't. The withdrawals totaled nearly $320,000, money apparently transferred from our joint investment accounts to a separate entity I'd never heard of, Griffin Consulting, LLC. Daniel established it as a side business venture, Harold explained, for consulting work separate from his main employment, a business I knew nothing about. A shell company, as Rebecca later explained, was likely created to funnel marital assets away from our shared portfolio. I photographed every document Harold shared, noting dates, amounts, and account numbers. My next step was accessing our home computer. Daniel wasn't particularly tech-savvy and used the same passwords for most accounts. Variations of our children's birthdays combined with our anniversary date. The irony wasn't lost on me as I used Gen52719 to access his email account. What I found confirmed my suspicions and revealed new betrayals. Email exchanges with a realtor about purchasing a condominium in Charlotte, North Carolina, an offer, letter from Halra Audio, a company based in Charlotte, dated 3 months earlier. Flight confirmations for weekend trips he'd claimed were golf outings with clients, and dozens of emails to Jessica discussing their future plans. Once the anniversary party is behind us, I'll handle the divorce quickly, he wrote in one message. Marlene will be devastated, but she'll get over it. They had it all planned. He would announce our divorce at the anniversary party, portraying himself as the sincere husband who had simply fallen out of love but had politely waited for our milestone anniversary before moving on, and then he would move to Charlotte. With Jessica taking his new job at Hestra and living in the condominium they had already chosen together, I sat at our desk reading their well-thought-out plans to demolish my life and felt something harden inside of me. Wasn't just an affair or a midlife crisis. It was a full-scale scheme to get rid of me with little financial repercussions after I had dedicated my adult life to helping him succeed. We had a simple prenuptial agreement. In the event of a divorce, each party would keep assets brought into the marriage, while assets accumulated during the marriage would be divided equally. Rebecca helped me to broaden my investigation, and I needed to know not only what Daniel was planning, but also what legal weaknesses existed in his strategy. Rebecca quickly pointed out a crucial infidelity clause, which states that if either party has an affair outside of marriage, they lose their right to certain protections. I could potentially claim rights to much more than half our marital property, including parts of Daniel's retirement accounts and stock options, if I could prove that Daniel's relationship with Jessica had lasted years rather than months, she explained, adding that the injured spouse is entitled to a much larger percentage of marital assets acquired during the years of infidelity. The key would be proving when the affair began. In order to prove that Daniel and Jessica had been dating for at least 2 years, I hired a private investigator, William Jacobs, who specialized in infidelity cases. His services weren't inexpensive, but I took money out of my personal savings account, money I'd saved up from my that Daniel was unaware of. He provided pictures of Daniel and Jessica dining together, going into and out of the apartment, and visiting Charlotte on weekends when Daniel claimed to be on golf vacations. The most damning evidence, however, came from interviews William conducted with Everkin Motors employees. William reported that one former executive assistant kept a detailed work diary that mentioned them spending time alone in his office with the door locked on multiple occasions. The assistant had been fired shortly after, allegedly for performance issues, and that their relationship was well known as early as the spring of 2023, according to 3 different sources within the company. William located her, and she was more than to share her records and testify if needed, still bitter about her unceremonious termination that she believed was orchestrated to keep her silent. Armed with this information, Rebecca added workplace harassment implications to our strategy. If necessary, we can suggest that Everkin Motors could face legal exposure for allowing a senior executive to engage in an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. She explained it's leverage we may not need to use, but it's valuable to have. As the weeks passed, I continued gathering evidence while maintaining a perfect facade of ignorance. I suggested the anniversary party, knowing it aligned with what Daniel had told Jessica. I spoke enthusiastically about the next 25 years when around friends and family. I even initiated physical intimacy occasionally, something that clearly made Daniel uncomfortable, but that he couldn't reject without raising suspicions. Each time he invented a work excuse to visit the apartment or Charlotte, I simply smiled and told him I understood. Each time he complained about finances while secretly funding his double life, I nodded sympathetically. All the while, my file grew thicker. The final piece fell into place 3 weeks before our anniversary. "We're ready," Rebecca told me at our final meeting before the anniversary party. "And the moment he makes his move, we'll respond with overwhelming force." I discovered a folder Daniel had apparently created by mistake in our shared account while backing up family photos to our cloud storage. The folder contained explicit photographs of him and Jessica together in the apartment, images dated consistently over the past 2 years. I forwarded them right away to Rebecca and William, who confirmed they provided clear visual proof of the timeline of infidelity. After months of research, paperwork, and strategic preparation, there was nothing left to do but wait for Daniel to set up his trap, not realizing that he was walking right into mine. He won't know what hit him. I left her office feeling oddly at ease. I chose the grand ballroom of the Jefferson Hotel, hired a string quartet, and planned a sophisticated evening to celebrate a lifetime of partnership. I sent invitations made of ivory cardstock embossed with silver to 60 of our closest friends and family members, and I watched Daniel's face as I showed him the final guest list. "This seems excessive," he said, obviously uneasy about the size of a celebration that he knew would end in destruction. "2 years deserve something special," I said innocently. "Don't worry about the cost. I've been saving for this." The evening arrived, and I wore a silver gown that had taken 3 fittings to perfect. Daniel seemed increasingly agitated as guests arrived, each congratulating us on reaching such a milestone. Our children had flown in, Thomas from Seattle and Jennifer from Boston, and both gave touching toasts about growing up watching their parents' loving partnership. "You've shown us what commitment really means," Jennifer said, raising her glass while Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside me. Throughout dinner, I noticed Daniel checking his watch, his face growing more resolved with each passing hour. I knew he was following the timeline he'd discussed with Jessica. The announcement came after dinner but before dessert, allowing for a dignified exit while guests were still present to support Marlene. When he finally stood and clinked his glass, a hush fell over the room. I watched his practiced smile, the rehearsed casualness in his posture, and thought about how many times he must have envisioned this moment, his declaration of independence, his new beginning at my expense. He said steadily, "I have something important to say," pausing to look around the room before continuing. "After much reflection, I want to be honest with everyone here tonight." The collective gasp was audible as he said, "I want a divorce." "I've been unhappy for years," he said, the practiced line falling flat in the elegant ballroom. Jennifer dropped her champagne glass, shattering it on the hardwood floor. Thomas half got up from his chair, his face battling confusion and anger. Our friends stared in disbelief, but I was prepared. I had practiced this moment as carefully as Daniel had. I simply nodded and replied, "I understand completely." The confusion on his face was worth every second of the previous 6 months of deceit. He had anticipated tears, pleading, maybe even a scene, but instead he received calm acceptance that obviously broke his narrative of being the reasonable party bringing an unhappy marriage to a halt. As I stood to speak to our stunned guests, I continued with ease. "I think we should thank everyone for coming. This has been a wonderful celebration of the past, even as we move toward different futures." I gave each departing guest a hug, graciously smiling as I accepted their confused support and whispered condolences. "You'll want to call them first thing in the morning," I said, slipping Rebecca's business card into Daniel's hand as he stared at it, recognition slowly dawning. Daniel stood awkwardly by the gift table, looking increasingly uncertain as his dramatic moment fizzled into uncomfortable social navigation. After the last guests had left, except for our children, who waited tearfully by the door, I approached Daniel with practiced composure. "The divorce lawyer, Rebecca Stone?" The blood drained from his face as, "Yes," I answered. "She's quite selective about her clients, but she made an exception for me 6 months ago." "6 months?" "Don't worry about coming home tonight," I added, in a friendly manner, adding that I had the locks changed this afternoon. "At the coat check, your necessities are placed in a suitcase. I assume to stay." "Let's go have that cake at home," I said, turning to our kids and putting my arms through theirs while he remained there in disbelief. "We've celebrated enough for one evening, I believe." I had slept better than I had in months when Daniel's lawyer called at 7:13 a.m. the next morning. "This is Philip Dawson, representing Daniel Griffin," the voice said sternly, "and I know there's a situation we need to discuss. Kindly send any correspondence to, according to the script, by 9 and the morning she anticipates your call. Rebecca called to let me know that Daniel was trying to minimize the damage by making a quick, large settlement offer, which was a blatant sign that he hadn't yet realized how well I had prepared. The house is included in the 60-40 share of existing, visible assets that he is proposing to you, she said. Should I let him know that we are just getting started? Absolutely. At 11 a.m., the formal divorce papers were served to Daniel at the Everkin Motors headquarters by a process server who, at my request, delivered them during a board meeting Daniel was leading. The thick document detailed not only my terms, 85% of marital assets, the house, and significant alimony, but also included comprehensive evidence of his infidelity, financial deception, and plans to leave the state by noon. 3 things happened in rapid succession. Daniel's lawyer requested an emergency meeting, Everkin's human resources director called Daniel to their offices, and Jessica Palmer cleaned out her desk and left the building in tears. When Rebecca met with Daniel and his lawyer that afternoon, she brought the final bombshell. William's full investigative report, complete with witness statements from former Everkin employees about the inappropriate workplace relationship. My client is prepared to contact Everkin's board directly regarding the company's failure to address this situation if we cannot reach a satisfactory agreement, Rebecca informed them. Additionally, we have documentation of the Griffin Consulting LLC shell company used to divert marital assets, which raises questions of tax impropriety that authorities might find interesting. Daniel's attempt to seize control of our divorce narrative had completely collapsed in less than 24 hours. His lawyer requested a brief recess, during which I imagine he delivered some very unwelcome news to my husband of 25 years. The settlement. Negotiations were remarkably brief. Daniel, facing potential professional disgrace, tax investigations, and the complete destruction of the narrative he'd constructed about our marriage, accepted terms that went far beyond what even Rebecca had initially thought possible. I received 85% of our marital assets, including full ownership of our home, his retirement accounts, and investment portfolios. Daniel retained only his personal possessions, his car, and a single investment account worth approximately 1/5 of our total net worth. The alimony payments would continue for 10 years, ensuring my financial security well into retirement age. Most satisfying was the non-disclosure agreement. Daniel would never publicly discuss the circumstances of our divorce, effectively preventing him from spinning a sympathetic narrative about our separation. In exchange, I agreed not to contact Everkin's board directly about his relationship with Jessica, though I made no promises about what information might find its way out. 2 days after our anniversary party, Jennifer and Thomas came for dinner. They were still reeling from the public dissolution of their parents' marriage, but had begun to understand the situation after I shared selected details of Daniel's betrayal. How did you stay so calm through all of this? I would have burned. His clothes on the front lawn or something, Jennifer said, pouring another glass of wine. Strategic patience, I clarified. Your father believed that I was just a helpful wife and never valued my brains. Incredulous, Thomas shook his head and said, "Remind me never to cross you, Mom." That blind spot gave me the advantage. When I realized how thoroughly he had prepared to throw me out, I decided he needed to know precisely who he was dealing with, and I smiled, feeling truly joyful for the first time in months. At first, I didn't want retribution. I just wanted justice. Daniel moved to Charlotte as scheduled, a month after the anniversary celebration, alone, much poorer, and professionally diminished. Jessica, it turned out, had lost interest once his financial situation drastically changed. The condominium they had chosen together was now out of his price range, and Helstra Audio had withdrawn their offer after finding out why he had left Everkin. As I settled into my reclaimed life, I thought about the irony that in trying to get rid of me, Daniel had unintentionally allowed me to become more fully myself than I had been in 25 years of marriage. Meanwhile, I started the next chapter of my life on my own terms, with resources, dignity, and the deep satisfaction that when put to the test, I had risen to the challenge with strength and intelligence I hadn't known I possessed.